So in this section, you're going to find the derivative using the product rule. My recommendation is if you don't need to use the product rule, then I wouldn't. Either way, you're going to get the same answer. I'm going to go ahead and do it the way that they ask and show you that you'll get the same answer. But if you want to go ahead and use one rule over the other, that's fine as long as you're able to use one rule over the other. So on number 1, it's asking us to use the product rule first. So y equals x to the 4th times x to the 5th. I have a little saying for your product rule. So if you have a function f times a function g, if we call the first function high and the second function low, then your product rule is high d low, derivative of the low piece, plus low d high. So when I put a d on there, it means it's derivative, and when I have just the plain old letter, it means just the plain function. So high d low plus low d high. So in this case, x to the 4th is high, x to the 5th is low. So y prime is, let me write it out, high d low plus low d high. High stands for your first piece, x to the 4th. D low is the derivative of the low piece, which is 5x to the 4th. Plus low is x to the 5th. D high is the derivative of the first piece, 4x to the 3rd. So here you will end up getting 5 times 1 is 5. X to the 4th times x to the 4th, you add exponents and get x to the 8th, plus 4x to the 8th. And these terms are like, so you get 9x to the 8th. Find the derivative by multiplying first. In this case, multiplying first is actually going to be easier. So first we take x to the 4th and x to the 5th and multiply them, you get x to the 9th. And now if you take the derivative, it's a basic power rule. Bring your 9 out front, drop your exponent by 1, you get 9x to the 8th. And they're the same thing. Every single time you should get the same thing. So again, I'm going to keep doing it like they ask. And using whichever rule they say first, and then just doing it the other way. So on this one, number 2, it tells us to use the product rule. If you wanted to use a different method, you could FOIL it first. So in this case, this is my high, this is my low. So y prime is high, 4x to the 2nd plus 3, d low, which is 4, plus low, 4x minus 3, d high, 8x. So on the first part, you distribute your 4, you get 16x squared plus 12. On the second part, distribute 8x, you get 32x squared minus 24x. Combine likes, 16 and 32 is 48. And then nothing else is like, minus 24x plus 12. And there's your derivative. On G, let's go ahead and use the product rule because that's what they asked. And make sure you practice the product rule because sometimes you're not able to use the product rule. I mean, you have to use it. So G prime here is high, 5x to the 5th, D low, 4x to the 3rd, plus low, x to the 4th minus 4, D high, 25x to the 4th. We need to clean it up. Distribute. You get 20x to the 8th. Over here, you're going to distribute 25x to the 4th, so plus 25x to the 8th minus 100x to the 4th, and combine likes, 45x to the 8th minus 100x to the 4th. 4 asks you to use the product rule again. So before I even use this product rule, let me change this to 9x to the 1/2 plus 8 all times x squared. So your first piece is high, your second piece is low. Y prime, high, 9x to the 1/2 plus 8. You've got to keep it in parentheses. D low, 2x, plus low, x squared. D high, 1/2 times 9 is 9 over 2x. Drop your exponent by 1. So your new exponent is negative 1/2. And then when you distribute again, we're not distributing. I'm doing D high. So the derivative of the 8 is 0. High, D low, plus low, D high. So let's clean this thing up. When you distribute the 2x, you get 18. And you've got to add these exponents together. So 1 over 2 plus 2 over 2 is x to the 3 over 2. And then distribute again, you get 16. That's just x. I wrote 2 over 2, but it's x to the first. On the next piece, same thing. So instead of x to the second, I need a common denominator with 2. So I'm going to make it 4 over 2, because that's still 2. Multiply coefficients, you get 9/2. Add exponents. 4/2 plus negative 1/2 is 3/2. So now I can combine these like terms, this piece and this piece. So I need a common denominator there. That's 36 over 2. That's 18, x to the 3/2. If I combine it with 9 over 2, x to the 3/2, and then you still have 16x. So our final answer, 36 plus 9 is 45, all over 2, x to the 3/2 plus 16x. This one might have actually been a lot easier if you distributed first and did not use your product rule. Okay, number 5. Let's use the product rule. Here's your high. Here's your low. Y prime. High, 4 minus x squared. D low, 3x squared minus 2. Plus low, x to the third minus 2x plus 1. D high, the derivative of 4 is 0, so be careful there. The derivative of negative x to the second is negative 2x. So down here, we're going to have to FOIL this piece, the first piece. So first, you get 12x squared. Outer, you get minus 8. Inner, you get minus 3x to the fourth. And last, you get plus 2x squared. And on this piece, we're distributing negative 2x to all three pieces. So negative 2x to the fourth plus 4x squared minus 2x. And now we should be home free. So your highest is negative 3x to the fourth, negative 2x to the fourth. That's negative 5x to the fourth. There's no to the thirds. So we've got 12x squared and 2x squared. That gives us 14x squared. And then 4x squared is 18x squared. And then last we've got this minus 8 and a minus 2x. Those aren't like. So next let's write minus 2x. And then last let's write minus 8. Number 6, I've got another little catchy saying. If you have y equals your top function divided by your bottom function, again, we'll call the top high the bottom low, because that makes sense. Your derivative is low d high minus high d low all over the low piece squared. So first time we're going to use the quotient rule. Second time we're going to divide first, which in this case, dividing first is easier. So this is my high, this is my low. Y prime. Low, x to the fifth, d high, 8x to the seventh, minus high, x to the eighth, d low, 5x to the fourth, all over low, x to the fifth, quantity squared. So on top you get 8. When you multiply exponents, you add them, x to the 12th, minus 5, again, add your exponent, 12. And then on bottom, when you have that exponent raised to another exponent, you multiply them, x to the 10th. A lot of times it's the algebra that messes you up, not the calculus. So on this one you get 3x to the 12th, because they're like on top, over x to the 10th. And then if you divide, you subtract exponents, which gives you 3x to the second. So from the very beginning, we could have started out with our original y being x to the 8th over x to the 5th, and you could have subtracted those exponents and gotten x to the 3rd. So y prime would then be 3x to the 2nd. So in that case, it was a lot easier, but a lot of times you can't do that. 7. Quotient rule. This is high, this is low. Y prime. High, 2x to the 3rd plus 6. D low, 1. Minus low, D high, 6x squared. Over low squared. So we get 2x to the 3rd plus 6. Minus 6x to the 3rd, all over x to the 2nd. Which then gives you 6 minus 4x to the 3rd over x to the 2nd. That's done. 8's another product rule. So your first piece is high, your second piece is low. Y prime. High, 3x to the 4th minus x plus 1. D low, negative 5, x to the 4th plus low, negative x to the 5th plus 1. D high, 12 x to the 3rd minus 1. High, D low, plus low, D high. Alright, on the first piece you're just going to distribute. So multiply coefficients, add exponents. On the second piece you've got to FOIL it. First, negative 12 x to the 8th, outer plus x to the 5th, inner plus 12x to the 3rd, last minus 1. Combine your likes. Negative 15 and negative 12 is negative 27x to the 8th. 5's next. 5x to the 5th and 1x to the 5th is 6x to the 5th. You got a 4th, 5x to the 4th. You got a 3rd, 12x to the 3rd, and you got a 1, minus 1. You could have FOILed that one out first and then taken your derivative. This one you have to use the quotient rule. There is no other way to take this derivative. So high, low, y prime. Low, d high, 4x squared, minus high, d low, over low squared. So on the first piece, let's distribute. You get 36x to the 5th plus 8x squared. Be careful with this minus. So I'm going to leave it minus with a parentheses. Distribute this piece. So minus 54x to the 4th minus 27 times 7, 189 x to the 2nd over, this one you're going to have to FOIL it. So square your first, you get 81 x to the 6th. Multiply together, you get 18 times 2, you get 36 x to the 3rd. And square your last, you get 4. And actually, let's go ahead and keep this in factored form. That way, if something on top is able to cancel with it, we're already factored and we're not going to need to do it again. So go ahead and leave them all in factored form. Okay, the top becomes 36x to the 5th plus 8x squared minus 54x to the 4th plus 189x squared over 9x to the third plus 2 all squared. And it looks like I only have one common piece. So 36x to the fifth minus 54x squared, 189 and 8 is 197 x squared all over 9x to the third plus 2 quantity squared. The only other thing you could do, this is a 4, the only other thing you could do is factor out that x squared term, but it's not going to get you anywhere, so I'm going to leave it just like that, even though it's kind of ugly. And number 10. The only way y'all know how to do this is your quotient rule. So let's call the top high and the bottom low f prime. Low, d high, the derivative of 1 is 0. Minus high, d low, the derivative of the bottom is 3 over low, all squared. So 0 times anything is 0. Your top piece is negative 3. Your bottom piece is going to stay 3x minus 5 all squared.